Welcome back for a special new video. But first of all, this is of course match 1 of the special Capcom game tournament that I announced a few weeks prior, which is a battle between, at random, I choose 2 of the 16 Capcom games announced in each match. We duke it out, and everything will keep continuing until it's down to one title that, in my view, made the biggest impact, looking at also sales numbers, as well as impact in the arcades and overall as a whole influence of Capcom related games. And this includes all genres from Capcom, though specifically looked at many people's opinions best Capcom games from different Facebook game groups that I'm members in. But with that said, quickly have 2 announcements for my secondary channel, a special retro review I'm working on in the near future on the less well-known R.L. Stine series known as The Nightmare Room. Yeah, both original VHS from years ago, but yeah, this is a special retro review, and also announcing my next album review, which is definitely, obviously, for a big band, and that is I will be reviewing my personal favorite album from, of course, the Beatles, and that is Abbey Road. But with that said, now let's get to it. Music choice today from Marvel vs. Capcom 2. For a reason, this is going to be a duke out between Juggernaut titles from Capcom, specifically of the crossover series, and a Juggernaut that is seen still influenced today, definitely in the competitive scene. And the 2 games going at it are going to be Street Fighter 3 Third Strike facing off against Marvel vs. Capcom 2. And my assistant, the Lord himself, or one of the great ancient lords, Lord Cthulhu. Okay, so with that said, now we have a view of the 2 titles. First up, let's look at Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. Even though I'm not the biggest Street Fighter 3 fan, as I said before, though, I have a personal weakness and love for the first title of the 3. That is Street Fighter 3 New Generation. Why? I'm not sure. I just prefer that game overall. Earlier on, but I love the music, and I like a lot of the stage designs from the first game. And it gives me a little bit of feel towards like Vampire Savior, just some of the stage designs. But with that said, even though I'm not the biggest fan of Third Strike, obviously its influence can still be felt to this very day, especially in the competitive scene, and the fact that Third Strike is one of the games that really made EVO become as big as it would in the future. But one could say the same thing about Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which arguably is also a key. Funny enough, both these games would become key influential games for one specific big name in the fighting game competitive scene. Of course, that being obviously probably my personal favorite, being, of course, Justin Wong. But Justin, arguably one of the coolest big names in the fighting game community. Max is a big person on YouTube and social media, bigger so than anyone else pretty much. But on the other hand, Justin is definitely needs no introduction because of a specific moment in EVO history when he faced off against his arch nemesis. But with that said, on other domains, sales wise, Third Strike would not sell that great in its original launch because it was, of course, a console exclusive to the Sega Dreamcast. Funny enough, at original console launch, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 would also be an exclusive to the Dreamcast as well, which is quite fascinating, really, when you look back at both games. Now, with that said, who do I think had the bigger, say, influence overall in the fun game community? Really, It is amazing. People don't realize how big Third Strike actually is in the community. It would help establish many big names today in Evo history, as well as help basically individuals such as Maximilian do. That would be a game originally that would make him become somewhat pretty well known. Though arguably what really would make him become big on YouTube though would be his love and passion for Marvel vs. Capcom thanks to Assist Me, which are great if you ever get a chance to check them out. But with that said, Third Strike, what are the major positives that it has? Simple. One, art. The art and sprite work in Third Strike, I would put pretty much on the same scale as Vampire Savior. Or even games like King of Fighters 13. I mean, seriously, the sprite and 2D artwork in Third Strike cannot be under at all estimated or overlooked. Its influence is still felt to this day, especially in areas like the competitive scene, thanks to, of course, the parry system is one of the big things. I think that elements definitely in the competitive scene that helped make Third Strike so unique. At the original time when it would come out, it would be relatively docile and not really a hit, be somewhat considered a bomb, at least in consoles numbers and units sold of the game. At the end of the day, it would sell less than 1,000,000 copies. No surprise. It would only sell a few 100,000 copies total on the Dreamcast. On the other hand, the original release of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 would see sales numbers of between 3 and 4 times that of Third Strike. But to be fair, the Street Fighter 3 series was always more, would become a big cult following in the competitive scene, and that's about it. It would become, though, I think, a little bit better well known in the 7th console generation, when it would get a online enhanced version released digitally only, unfortunately, for, of course, the 360 as well as the PS3. Of course, one of the big things that it would have is it actually had decent netcode for the most part, and that would help introduce an entire new generation of flying game fans to Third Strike and to the more competitive scene, and create more fans along the way. Third Strike's influence is still felt to this day, even if a lot of people don't really have any knowledge on Third Strike. Even though I never really played a lot of Street Fighter 3, I can say that I did own it on the Dreamcast, and I unfortunately am the only person I actually ever knew personally that ever owned the game. Though to be fair, back when the Dreamcast was out and big, I knew only 2 other people other than myself that actually had a Dreamcast. It's unfortunate, though we are a very passionate fan base. Unfortunately, we are still a relatively small fan base. Such it is. But with that said, the influence, though, then looking on the other side of things with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, arguably in many people's opinions, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 would be considered the pinnacle of the series as a whole. As of course many people hate on Infinite, though I still am a defender. But with that said, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, I loved. It was my favorite game of the series until, of course, eventually the release of Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Fate of Two Worlds, and then about 6 months later, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. That would, of course, arguably become my favorite of the franchise as a whole. Though, and I like that they did a better job on balancing with some of the characters in the Ultimate version, thank goodness. Like, say, somebody who broke the game named Phoenix, anyone? But with that said, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was a very unique game when it came out in like 2000. It was pretty much a perfect port from the arcades. No surprise, Dreamcast was really good at getting superb ports, or even improved over the original release, like Soul Calibur 1. but it had many great games from the series, and Capcom showed a lot of love to the Dreamcast as a whole, which I appreciate. Really, it would be PlayStation 1 and the Dreamcast that would make me become the juggernaut Capcom fan that I am to this day. I think one of the big things a lot of people in earlier days had issues with Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on was arguably the music. Though many of us do appreciate it, to be fair, a lot of your standard probably fighting game players at the time did not really like the music of the jazz and stuff. Personally, I found it unique. It helps give it a very distinctive sound, and I think period in history. Hopefully, eventually, we do get a remaster in current and next/current gen consoles. But nevertheless, it helps give it its own flair and unique style, such as Third Strike has with other elements. The sprite work is hit and miss with Marvel vs. Capcom 2. But with that said, arguably though, unfortunately, the negative side things of the game would be the boss, Abyss. Arguably, in my opinion, the weakest boss of the entire crossover series as a whole. Just arguably, that's one of the areas I think Infinite did better was with Ultron Sigma. But, with that said, still, nevertheless, doesn't change the fact it is a very unique game. I think many people to this day find quite fascinating and is still very much looked back on very fondly as people with Third Strike. Though I think at the end of the day, the influence, at least in standard gaming culture, I would say Marvel vs. Capcom 2 has a little bit more overall impact as a whole, given its sales numbers on the Dreamcast did better, and given the only other way you could end up playing Third Strike outside of, again, the future version was in the special anniversary collection. Though those aren't necessarily great ports either. Online Edition is arguably the best port on console. With that said, Dreamcast, at least on the other hand, had a great port with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, as well as you could play it also on the PS2, and of course the original Xbox, which the Xbox version is actually not bad. Unfortunately, the game would become extremely, in my opinion, overpriced throughout the years. As a whole, between all consoles combined, like I said, at the end of the Third Strike originally only sold a few 100,000 copies. However, between all consoles combined, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 would end up selling over 2 million copies, so arguably much larger base, but then again it was also on 3 platforms. So with that said, and unfortunately, unlike Third Strike, which you can still get online edition right now, if you get a chance, get it. If you have either a 360 or a PS3, especially PS3, get it while you still have the opportunity to get it before it's no longer available. Which, of course, happened many years ago with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, unfortunately. But at the end of the day, which game do I think had the bigger impact as a whole? Looking at sales numbers, critical reviews, and everything combined, looking just across the board at everything, I would say at the end of the day, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is the better game overall, and overall best experience. Speaking of nostalgia, yeah, I did play Third Strike, but I didn't get as hooked on it as many other people did, and I was just never as big a fan of the parry system. I was always a bigger Alpha series fan myself, which is probably why also I love the crossover franchise so much, because it plays more like the Alpha series. But with that said, at this battle between these two, I say personally, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is the better game and moves on to the next round. So with that said, leave a comment, tell me, am I incorrect? Am I wrong? What is your opinion? Which of the two games do you think is better? With that said, next time I've already picked out the next matchup, which is going to be a doozy. Next time in this tournament next weekend will be a battle between two of the most beloved games in the Resident Evil series. It's going to be a battle of Resident Evil 4 versus Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, which should be quite an interesting battle between two juggernauts of the Resident Evil franchise. So with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel. And if you at all like this, share it in maybe some other fighting game groups here. And I'm curious what people's opinions are of these two specific titles from Capcom. Which do people personally, looking back, prefer more? But with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Stay safe out there. And have a good rest of November.